Howdy, and welcome back to another Appsmith live coding episode. It's so great to be here. How are you doing today? I'm doing great. Extremely excited to have Joseph for another insightful learning session to enable you to create Appsmith apps. Joseph is ready, and I really don't want to waste time to get hands on code and learn everything that he has prepared. But before we begin, I'd like to invite you to say hello in the chat and, let us know where are you tuning in and also what other types of topics you like to learn in these live coding sessions. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you stay up to date with the latest AppSmith content and updates. We have a lot of content being prepared, for example, around workflows, which is one of the newest features that we have launched, also packages, more AppSmith AI, and more other features that we're going to be launching soon. So yeah, definitely subscribe over there. So let me bring Joseph already to the stage because we have a lot of things to cover. Hey Joseph, how's it going, buddy?
Hey, how's it going?
Doing good, man. So let us know what are you working on. Let's jump right over there.
Yeah, man. So I've got an awesome show for today. We're going to be working with Apache Echarts, doing some advanced SQL stuff, some advanced JavaScript. It's kind of connecting a lot of different things to just take you from, looking at an eChart example that you'd like to use, and your data is not in the right format. And so how do you take the code from that eChart example online and get that working in Appsmith, and then transform your data, connect it to the chart, and that alone is pretty useful just to be able to take your data and connect it to those charts. But if we have time, I want to work on actually making it dynamic so that the end user can choose which columns they're charting, without having to change and add new queries to the app. We want to make it dynamic and give them the ability to transform the data and just give them more insights and control over charting that data. So that's the end goal. There's a lot of stuff to cover, and it's really easier just to show you. So let's jump in. I'm gonna do a quick demo here of what we're going to build, and then we'll see how far we can get in an hour.
Awesome. Let's do that.
All right. So here I have a stacked line chart, and I can switch this to a bar chart.
Nice.
Choose which column to group the data by. So you can see I've got some data here that's which channel did these support tickets come in through? And this could be, GitHub or Zendesk or Intercom or whatever it is for your organization. But you've got, different channels of data. And then I've got some totals of the number of support tickets for each day and what the priority and severity is. And so you can choose as the end user here to be able to say, I want to look at the date for the x-axis. So per day, how many did we have? And you can look at it, a line or a bar chart. Maybe you want to look at the priority. So you can see that the categories of the lines here are high, medium, and low. And then I go to severity. So that's the end goal. We want to build this kind of dynamic interface that lets the user choose which columns they're charting.
That's pretty cool, man. And I mean, we know that AppSmith is obviously in the internal tool market. And obviously, any internal tool will need to have some sort of data visualization. And to me, it looks pretty similar to Tableau, right?
Yeah. This is kind of what I was envisioning when I started building this. Is an interface like Tableau where you can choose the chart type and then the column or the field that you're doing the summary, you're grouping things by. And then from there, it's just which one's the X and the Y axis. And with this particular data set, it seems like the only integer here, the good one to chart for the Y axis is the support tickets. But I mean, this could potentially have multiple X and multiple Y axis options based on your data set. So these options here are being generated from the data. It's looking at the existing data that I'm passing in and saying, oh, well, here's some column headers, and so it's letting the user choose those and making it all dynamic. So that's what we're looking at building today. We're going to go through just the general approach that you would do this to set this up with your data. If I, look at just my one example data set and then yours is in a different format, that's not as helpful. So trying to approach it from just how would anybody go from, okay, here's this chart I'd like to use, and here's the format that my data is currently in. So how do you connect the two? So I think that's a good overview of what we want to do today. So I'm going to just keep going and jump into it. And we'll start out looking at the Echart docs. So first, we're going over to the Echart website, and there's all these examples here. Just go to echarts.apache.org, and then the examples section here, and find the particular chart you'd like to use. There's tons of them in here, all grouped by types. There's some really cool specific ones like heat maps and calendar type things, and some of them even have animations and 3D. So there's just a ton of options. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can do. What we're going to look at today is this stacked line chart. And I think I got it here. Yeah, this is the code that the option object here, this config object contains everything needed to render this particular chart other than the charting library itself. So there's the eChart library, and in these examples on the website, that library is already loaded in. It's there ready to use. And so the only other thing going on here is option equals, and then this object here. And then that has a bunch of nested stuff. There's a title and tooltips. And if you look at the format of the data, it's probably nothing like what yours is structured like. You know, the legend here just has a list of columns. And when you get down to the series of data, here's a series, it's an array. And then you've got a couple properties and then just an array of values. It's not an object like you'd get back from an API or SQL. It's not like key and value, right? It's just a list of points. And so your data is probably in a totally different format. So that's what we're going to look at, is how to transform your data and get it into the chart. Okay, nice. So with this example, like I said, it's just an option object, and everything needed to create this chart is inside this option object other than the charting library. And so if I copy this into Appsmith, you know, in our chart widget, we have, I think I want to go to this one. Yeah. So we're going to start building just a static stacked line chart. We're not connecting our data yet. So I'm going to drag in a chart widget. And we have, I think, 7 or 8 different native chart types, bar, pie, you know, all the common stuff here. And then there's the eChart. So this one lets you use the eChart library and then do anything you want with their library. And there's just tons of options there. You'll also see the Fusion charts, which is being deprecated. If you're still using those in your apps, make sure to start looking into eCharts and look at, you know, which type you need to migrate to. Worst case is if you don't migrate, there's eventually going to show there'll be a watermark, because that's not an open source library, Fusion charts, and we're moving to eCharts because it is open source, and so there's no issue using that there, and we can continue to keep using that and not have to you know, have that watermark. So it won't break your charts if you're using Fusion. You'll just, and it doesn't hide, it doesn't cover the chart. It'll just be down here in the corner. Anyway, kind of got sidetracked. I wanted to mention Fusion there. So I dragged
that's
in
good to know. Probably people who are looking at right now, maybe some are using Fusion charts. So it's good that you mentioned that.
Yeah, we've got that in our docs, and there's a call out there that mentions, you know, the only downside, worst case, is it's going to show a small watermark here saying that it's Fusion charts. So not a huge deal, but we want it to be fully open source and not have a watermark and not have to charge people for that license. So yeah, so here we are with eCharts. Okay, so you change the chart type to eChart, and that reveals this custom eChart configuration field. So, you know, this particular input is only there when you're on eChart. I'm going to clear out everything that's in here and just paste in that option object, just like we copied it from the site. And you'll notice that it says it does not evaluate to type object. So select all of this and wrap it in double curly braces, and now it works. Kevin, I'm going to quiz you, man. You got any idea what the difference is, why the double curly braces help there?
In what, sorry?
Oh, so the as soon as I pasted that in, I'm getting this error that the option object here, it's saying it doesn't evaluate to an object. But if I wrap everything in double curly braces with the mustache syntax, right, it's the exact same code and it works. I'm just wrapping it with the double curly braces. You
It's
notice
because you're using the interpolation and now that becomes an object, or
it does become an object. Yeah.
yeah.
So as it's parsing it, it sees that there's no quotes on these properties,
Hmm.
and that's not valid JSON, but it is valid JavaScript.
Right.
And the double curly braces evaluate everything as JavaScript. We don't have any JavaScript in here yet. It's still just JSON, but
Hmm.
the double curly braces allow us to write JavaScript, and all of this stuff gets parsed as if it were. And pure plain JSON has to have quotes on the property names, whereas in JavaScript you can write code that is an object and doesn't have that, right? So
Right.
little nuanced thing there. I could just say wrap it in curly braces, but I like to, I like people to understand why you're getting an error. And yeah, so you paste that in there with the double curly braces, and that's it. We have the chart rendering. Okay, so it's really easy to go from most of these examples. If I check this one, it is also just an option object. So if I select all that and copy it, and we can paste that in here, and keeping the double curly braces. So now we have a different chart type, different set of sample data that came with it, and most of them you can do that with. So that's step one. Pick the chart that you want to use and get it to render in here,
Hmm.
so that
And
you
it's
know
good.
you're
It's good that the type of chart lives in the actual option array. I mean, the option object, because then we can just change the JSON structure and just change the type of the chart.
exactly. Yeah, that's where we're going with this, to make it
Yeah.
dynamic so that the end user can pick. So like in the finished one I have here where you're choosing the chart type, we'll get a little more into this later when we start looking at the data structure, but basically these two have a really similar data structure. So it's easy to
Hmm.
make them an option and just switch between them with the exact same data that we're passing in.
Hmm.
But with Echarts, there are so many different options that
Yeah.
the data structure that you pass in, it needs to be different to match the UI that you're trying to create. Whereas with our chart widget, our native one, it's a lot easier to use. It's a lot more basic as far as the data structure. All of them use the same XY series. So if you have some data where X is a label and Y is a number, you can switch between any of these chart types. And there's way more than two here, and they all use the exact same data structure. Whereas with eCharts, there's a big variation because
Right.
there's a ton of different chart types.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next thing that we want to do, we got a basic chart rendering, and we can like copy and paste and get that in here, but your data isn't connected. And what's before you can actually connect your data, you have to get it in the right format with whatever summaries that you want, right? This is going like Monday through Sunday here. And all of these numbers are totals. And if I go look at this example that we started with, you're not going to have a row in your database that says channel 1 had 12 support tickets on this date. Your data is going to be at a row level. Here's one ticket from this channel, and it has this priority, and severity. And then you might have hundreds or thousands of them, right?
Hmm.
So the thing that you want to chart is more than likely going to be aggregate data like this, but your data is being stored at a row level, and those aggregates don't exist yet, right? So that's not an eCharts thing. That is bringing your data to eCharts in the right format. So now we're kind of switching from looking at how to do stuff with eCharts to transforming a data set using an SQL query to get it in the right format. And then we'll come back here to eCharts and start connecting it. So onto the actual SQL. For this one, I've got some hard-coded data here. This is just some JSON in the background. We're going to start with some row-level data and create some aggregates. So next, I'm going over to Supabase here. And I've got this table that has 2 million records. When you have a smaller data set, you could query it all to the client side and loop over it and calculate totals if you wanted to, right? It's not the best practice, a lot more overhead on the client side. You could do it with a smaller data set. But when we're talking 2 million records, like there's just no way. If you want those aggregate values, you have to do the query on the server side on SQL, bring that data over, and then you might have to transform it even more to connect
Mhm.
it to Echarts. But you definitely want to get that aggregate data first, right? Do that in the SQL side. So
Right.
I just wanted to show the data set we're working with here, that it is a live real data set of 2 million records. And we're going to make it a dynamic query that's performant, that lets the end user get all those summaries and choose which column. So this is what we're starting with. And next we're going to switch to connecting your data here. So I've got a blank canvas. Go to the nothing on the UI side yet. No JavaScript, and I've got a single query here connected to that table we just looked at. So if I run this, I'm getting back 10 records. Now, there's no way I could just take off the limit. That's going to time out. Even if I kept upping the time limit, like it's just not going to load in 2 million records, right? So first thing we're going to do is start getting some kind of aggregate and get this into like a manageable set of data that we can pass to the chart. And we'll start with just, say, the region. And I think there's a units sold. Yeah. So this column here, units sold, is an integer. And I want to sum that up per region and get just those 2 points to start out with. Okay. So we could say select region and units sold. And I know this is going to get an error, but I think these are helpful errors and it's good learning. So we're going to break some stuff and see what errors we get, and then use that feedback to keep building this query. So first, let's say I wanted to get the sum of the units sold here. We're going to have several errors here on this first one. But let's say you started trying it this way. If you tried to grab the region column and then the sum of the units sold, now I can take off the limit because we should get some kind of summary, right? Like one per region. And so if I run this, okay, we have an error at or near sold. So it was okay with region, okay with sum, it was good with units, and then there's an error here, right? So the first issue is that there's a space in this column name. So if I put some quotes around here for table and column names and things that you're referencing like that in SQL, you want to use double quotes, and then it's single quotes for string. Like if you're inserting a string value in the insert values, that would be a single quote for a string. That's why I remember it as double is table and fields and single is strings. So let's see what we get now. Now it says region does not exist. Okay, so we took care of the first error here, and it says region does not exist. But we just looked at the data when I did the other query. We'll look back here, and region is definitely a column, and it is uppercase. So the next thing that we need to know here is, even though there's no space, you still need double quotes if it's case sensitive, unless it's, if it's not all lowercase. So region does not exist. Now we run it. Oh, now there's a different error. Okay. So that's why, like, anybody could get any, like, 2/3 or whatever of this thing right, and then one part of it's wrong. And so I want to show all the errors, all the combos.
Right. And that's normally the way it is when you're actually doing development. And that's why I enjoy a lot doing live coding events, because
Mhm.
it shows how a normal developer does the work. Like, you don't just do perfect SQL syntax on
Yeah.
the first time. Now, obviously, we have the help from ChatGPT or other prompts, but
Mhm.
eventually, this is the way that you will always approach when you're having a bug or some sort of error, right?
Right. Yeah. Some tutorials, like, they take that happy path and everything goes perfect and
Yeah.
makes it look super easy. And then you're 2 minutes into it and banging your head and smashing the keyboard. Like, what? So I try to show the same things that I ran into. So
Yeah, and the
we
other
got,
thing you mentioned about doing some sort of, for example, aggregator or some manipulation in the backend before sending to the front end
mhm,
or to Appsmith in this case, that's a bit best practice. That's something that probably you're not going to get from a prompt. They probably just give you, oh yeah, you want to do an aggregator? Here's the SQL
yeah.
syntax, and then you get this bottleneck and performance issues, and then you're going to be like, this is a bad tool. And no, it's because you have to understand how to do things and how to manipulate things depending on, in this case, how many records you have in the database.
Yeah. And that's why I went with this massive data set, because it's
Hmm.
pretty much impossible. You can't do it. You have to use the best practice, basically. So, okay.
Awesome.
So now we have a new error. We took care of the space issue with double quotes, took care of this uppercase field name. And now it says the error is, it's also the region column, but this time it says that it must appear in the group by clause in order to use an aggregate function. So if we want this column to be summed up, take multiple rows and turn it into one, we need to know what to do with the other column that's still individual rows, right? So from sales, group by, and then we'll use quotes this time because we know better. So group by region. Okay, we finally got some data back. And it says we have 7. There are 7 different regions. So that's way more manageable to be able to display in a chart. Now let's look at, I want to do item type. I think there's 12 there. Yeah, okay. So now we've got 12 things that each one of these could be a different line series on the chart if we wanted, okay? But if we have 2 properties, so if it was a simple chart with a single series, we'd have enough data. We would have the X value for a label and the Y value for the point, or the bar height or whatever it is. But we want to make a breakdown by item type and then show, say, let's look at the raw data here. So all these sales, there's a unit sold and the order date. So let's say we want to look at the date across the bottom, just like we did in this example. And the x-axis here is the date. And then we can group them by item type and see what the sum of the units sold is for each one of those. So back to the chart here. We have item type, we have the sum. And so we're going to add the other column, order date. I think that's what it's called. It also has a space, so. And we're back to an error here. Same thing we had before. It says, if we're going to use an aggregate for one column, these others, it needs to know what to do with it because these are, a bunch of individual rows. So I have to add the order date to the group by as well. So first we're grouping by the item type. We'll get all of the, fruits, all of the cereal. Each item type will be its own group. And then within that group, we want it by order date. Cannot type today. There it is. Is that the right column name? Okay, it timed out on me. Let's look at it is order date.
Maybe increasing the timeout just a little bit for testing.
Yeah,
Settings.
I was using a higher timeout last time, but I don't think it needs too much more. Let's try it one more time.
Just for testing.
So we saw there were 12 item types. Oh, I know what it is. Okay. Yeah, I'm still asking for a massive amount of data right now because it's per order date. We're not grouping the order date into a day of the week. So rather than having a combo of 12 item types times 7 days of the week, we have 12 item types times every single day.
Every single date in the order.
Yeah, and this thing's multiple years. So we're kind of grouping, we're kind of asking for an aggregate, but it's still a lot to ask in one query. That's what I'm missing. So what we want to do is get this order date as the day of the week that it is, okay? So the next part of this then, we're going to go to the Postgres tutorials. And the function that I was looking for, it's extract, and I did not see it in the sidebar here. Most things on Postgres tutorials you'll see it right here on the side, and you can quickly find whatever you're looking for. The thing we need to use is extract, and I didn't see it there, but if you search up here in the top right, do a search, and it's like the fourth thing here. We're looking for this Postgres extract function. So what this will do, you give it a thing that you want to extract from, and then the field. So you wrap it in parentheses there, say that here's the thing I want to extract, and then here's all the options. We are going to use this day of week. So it's extract day of week from, and then the field. So back here, I'm going to wrap that in quotes. And I think there's still a little bit more we need to do for take care of some errors, but let's keep running and see what we get. There's still a few things I need to fix here. I was kind of hoping we get another helpful error, but I think this one's just going to time out, and now it's set to 20 seconds. So, okay. So the next thing is that I'm going to go back and rename this one. Let's take this out for just a minute because I skipped something here, and I don't want to go past it and have the date and everything in here. So back to just getting those two values. It's calling it sum. But what is it the sum of, right? We should give it a name. So, and I'm going to do that with a date as well. But I wanted to back up and do it here. So it's selecting the item type, and it's still calling it item type. That's fine. The units sold column is no longer accurately units sold, right? It's the sum of that. And then sum isn't very descriptive on its own. So I'm going to call it total sales. And I don't know why I'm using uppercase. So now we can rename that column. We're getting back the same data, but I'm giving it a name. And we need to do the same thing then with the date, because it's no longer the exact date. It's the day of the week. So back to adding in that date. We're selecting the item type. I'm going to put these on separate lines. Since we're not just saying the field name, we're like each one's kind of a function manipulating stuff. So we're selecting the item type, the sum of units sold as total sales. And then here, I'm going to put that back. Extract the day of week from the order date as okay. And then to the group by section here, I need to also group it by the extra column that I'm requesting. So everything either needs to have a summary function on it like that, like sum or average or whatever, or it needs to be one of the columns that's in the group by. And we should refer to it as the new name here now. Now, because this is an individual row level thing, the order date, whereas the day of the week is the new aggregate. So let's see what we get now. I think we're getting close. From extra comma. That was the last item. Okay, you notice the number that we're getting back now? 84. There were 12 item types, 7 days of the week, right? So that checks out. We're getting back aggregate total data now. We have 3 different data points. So we have the item type, which could be a line series, and there are 12 of those. So we could make a chart with 12 lines. This total is specific to that item type. And then we have the day of the week. And then here's day 2, 3, whatever. It looks like it's already ordered by day of week. I would best practice. This data set's like programmatically generated. Somebody made like, here's the values and loop through and then just, and so that it happens to be sorted, but your data probably won't be, which means your chart's going to be a mess. And you could do that, like we said before. It's another thing that could be done with JavaScript. And I love JavaScript and I'd have fun writing that, but it's much better to let the server do this extra work. If you had set to sort through. So
That was gonna be my question. Like, if will you recommend doing that sorting here in the query
yep.
or passing the data to the JavaScript to
And
a
we're going to
JavaScript
do it
object?
with the exact
Okay,
same two fields in the same order as the group
right.
by. So now we know that the item type, it will list all 12 going from day of the week 0 to 6, and then on to the next one. And when we loop over the data now with JavaScript to transform it to the right final form, to the final version needed for that chart, we can know that it's already sorted, and it's one less thing you have to do with JavaScript. So this isn't just a one-step thing. You've got to transform your data as much as you can first with SQL, and then when you've got it to where there's not as much to do, like minimize how much work you have to manipulate it with JavaScript, then now we can switch over to that part. So I think this is it. This is as close as we can get the data to the right format for the chart widget. And now it's time to do something with this to connect it to the chart. So we're going to go back to looking at some eChart stuff now. And I think I've got another app here I wanted to show. Here we go. Okay. This is coming from one of the eChart examples in the tutorials, not the chart examples. And I'll show you that here in a minute. But what I want to look at here is the code that's creating each one of these data sets. If I look at the option object here, in this case, instead of pasting it right here, I've just got a JS object 1 with an option variable defined, and all that exact same code is just over here in a JS object. It's nothing but that one option object. So it's just like we saw before. You copy and paste in the option object and it works. I've just moved that over here so it's easier to work with. And then I'm supplying a data set here. This is not a required field. Let's go back and look at this one here. So the most basic, not their simplest line, because there's a single line chart. But this is really no more complex other than the fact that there's like multiple series down here. It's not just one object. But I'm trying to remember where we were going next with this. Sorry. Oh yeah, the static filter thing. So you supply a data set, and you'll notice that this example does not have a separate top level thing up here that says data set. It just says, here's some columns for the data, and then here's the points, right? But where's the JSON array? Where's like the actual data format? It does not exist here, and it's not a required field, right? You can skip that and just pass it in right here. But most people's data is not going to be in that format. So there's another option that you define this data set. You can see that stuff will autocomplete in here too and show you like what the different options are. So you have to define a data set and then pass it an array. And then that array can be a 2D array, like an array of array values, or it can be a JSON. So next we're going to check out the docs and just kind of look at that structure before I go into actually implementing it and doing ours. I want to show kind of where this stuff is in the docs and just background on it. So let's see. We're in the eCharts docs here on the option section. So this is just the definition of an option object, and there's a lot to it. Most of it is optional. Like there's only a few things that everyone will have, and then depending on the chart type, there's other stuff. When it comes to a data set, it can be a 2D array. So it's an array of, here's row 1, like a CSV, and then just rows of data. Or it can be, more than likely what your data is going to come back as from a SQL query or a API. It's going to be objects like this, right? So we're going to use this and pass in an array of JSON of our data, and then be able to reference that to create a chart. And so there's a lot to this, and there's a couple different approaches. And to be able to cover it all, I think for the rest of this, we're just going to walk through some examples that are already built. And if we got some time, we might try to build one. But I'm going to show you how this stuff works. And if you take that combined with the SQL that we just did of how to transform your data, connect these two, you should have everything you need to go from any data structure, wherever your data source is, to any one of these chart types. So you can see that there's this data set option that you could be passing in, and the eChart example that we want to use does not use it. It's just putting the data right here, like in this format, right? So next step, you've got the static chart working. You've done the SQL query to transform your data and get it back in those aggregate values. And now we're trying to connect the two. Okay. So if we check out, let me stay with the docs, show you their example first. Sorry, I'm bouncing all over. There's so many things to learn here. I've gone down the rabbit hole and learned a ton of stuff about Echarts in the last couple of weeks. So now we're in the docs looking at the tutorial section. Let me show you how I got to this one. If you click the tutorial tab here, it just goes to this whole page, and then there's data transformation. So data transformation uses a data set. So I showed you the other part first there, is that's that optional property that you can supply. But when you supply a data set, it doesn't just instantly connect it to your chart. It's just there for you to reference and do something with. So you add the data set, and now we got some examples here of how you can use it. Here's one where they're passing in that 2D array format, and it says this data set is on index 0. So you have var option, data set is an array, and then inside of that array is an object representing each data set. Dataset.source is the actual data, but there's other things besides the source. Where is that one at? Here it is. So the dataset source is the actual data that you're passing in. You can give it some extra details about the dimensions and the headers and how you want to transform it and all this other stuff. So in this example, you pass in that 2D array of data, and then you say you want to transform the data. So the second object in the data set array is a transform. And this has this setup, this config. What type of transformation do you want to do? We're going to do a filter. And then what are the filter, like the config of that filter? The most basic example is just this field equals this value. And this saves you from having to write JavaScript. You're editing JSON, but you're not writing a function to loop over the data and filter it, right? So this is just a convenient syntax that Echarts provides. You can say, here's my data set, and now here's a transform, and I want to use these this field, this value. Here's another one, and it's grabbing the next year, and then the next year. And so each one of these is a new data set index. We're in this data set, which is inside the options. And then here's some source data for this first object, which is data set index 0. You can also give it an ID. This is commented out, but if you wanted to say, give it a name, this can then be referred to by that name later. But the index is always there. So regardless of whether or not you name it, this is data set index 1, and it has this transform on it. And then there's data set 2, and their docs are great. There's like the comments and everything are really helpful here. And then this is the third one. And now you're on to actually using that data. So then here it says for the series, instead of having that array of here's the data points, this is just saying where the center of a pie chart is. It's not the actual data, right? And then here it says instead of data, it's data set index 1. So if we go back to that line chart, in this series, the series had .data, and it's the actual points. You can use this exact same chart, supplying the data differently. That's what we're doing is you find the chart you want to use. You're not going to try to twist your data into this format. I mean, you could, but I would not try to line up these array points with these column names, and create and break apart your data into that format. It's just much easier to use this transformation tool that they provide. So let's see. So here's the result. You got this full 2D array data set here of here's the columns. And then for this row, here's the sales price and year. And then for serial, here's sales price and year. Supplying the data that way, or a JSON array would work up here. And then giving it a couple transforms. And then in the series, you just reference dataset index. So one way to approach this is that you pass in your data after you've done that aggregate query like we did. And then you just copy and paste X number of these and change the dataset index. And the same up here for the filters, copy and paste so many filters and change that value. So I've done that here with a different data set. Actually, oh yeah, it's the same chart type, but it is a different data set. This is using the channels and the support tickets and things like I did in the first example. And so if you look at the code here, I have connected my data with dataset.source, which is not in that original chart example, but it's one of those things you can add. And then whenever you do a transform, it assumes that you want to transform the original data set. So every one of these says, okay, go back to the original data set, apply this filter, and that becomes data set index 1. Your original is index 0. And then this transform is being applied again to the first one. So you're always starting with that source. However, you can chain these together and reference the output of one transform to the input of the next if you want. All this stuff is in their docs. I'm not going to go too far into that. Just wanted to point it out that you can chain those together. So let's see. Here's an array. Instead of it being transform and then object type is filter, it's transform and then an array with multiple objects. So inside of a transform can be a single object or an array of objects with the exact same structure. And this will chain those filters together. And then it's a single data set that's had multiple transformations done on it. I think that's just about everything I wanted to cover. So one other piece to this. I think I might be back in the docs here on a data set. Let's see, transform. Maybe it was part of the source. I'm trying to remember where I found this. Encode, that's the name of it. Oh, right. It's inside of a specific, excuse me, a specific chart type. So with a line chart and several others, there's this encode function. And you'll need to use this if you're not supplying your data in this format. So this is ready to go straight to the chart. I mean, it's as descriptive and short as it can get. Here's the columns across the top, or that's the x-axis. The columns are up there. And here's the data points, right? And it's like stripped everything else out and is reduced as it can get, basically. But we want to be able to pass in our full data set, which has lots of different columns and properties and whatever. And so if you add this encode object inside of a series or the data set, I think you can do it at the data set level if it's the same for all of them. You at either point, you say that you want the X to come from this and the Y to come from that. This example is still putting it in as array, but you can also do it with the name of the field. So encode for the X, use the date. Sorry, here it is. For the X, use the date, and then for the Y, here's the possible values. Or it could just be a single string or a number here. And that's going to let you pass in the data and not have to rename it or twist it a second time and create an array right here. You can just say encode, and then for X, use this, and Y, use that. I think I might have an example of that somewhere. Okay, now we'll get to this in a minute. That's not the one I wanted to show. That's getting into the real complex stuff. Sorry, man. I've been doing so many experiments with this stuff. I've got it spread out everywhere. Static.
It's good. I mean, it's good that we have you experimenting and testing and trying, so we don't have to do it ourselves.
Yeah. Somewhere I thought maybe I might have deleted that one as it was a practice. But anyway, you can use that encode format to connect the two. So you got your data passed in as an object. Transform data. Here's the one. So you got a options.dataset dot source, or actually it's an array first. And then this one has a source and your data, and then just however many transforms that you need, and reference that in the series. And that will get you to where you can put multiple series for each one of your categories. In our live data set example here, it's the item type. But whatever it is that you want to break into series, that's the way Echarts would have you do it without writing any code and just editing that config. There's one thing I don't like about it though. You cannot just programmatically create all of those series for each category. You have to go through and type out, I need a transformation for this field and this value. And if you've got 12, right, like the item types that we had in our example, I mean, realistically, it might only take you 5 minutes to copy and paste this 12 times and change the values. And it's a one-time thing that you'll have to do. So it's not that bad. But developers, man, like, we love to take something like that's repetitive. And even though it's only going to take you 5 minutes, we'll spend like 2 hours building some code to do it, to make it automatic. And so that's what I did.
Awesome.
That is how this one works, where it's dynamic and lets you choose which columns. And so this is kind of the icing on the cake, basically. If you get everything working and you got your one chart type, and now you want to make it dynamic and reuse that and make the code to where you can switch which column and not have to rebuild all that from scratch for the next chart and the next chart. So the last piece of this, then, I'm just going to walk through the code. It's way too much to try to build in the little bit of time we got left. How are we doing on time?
We are 46 minutes in.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll be able to at least walk through the code on this and give you an idea of how you would connect all this and make it dynamic on your end. So the first thing that I did to start approaching this to make it dynamic is looked at that option object and just reduced it as much as I could, took out the data for the legend here, and just put a placeholder of an empty array. I'm going to push some values to it later, but I know I want the legend and then some kind of data. I kept the stuff that was in there that's just part of the config to make this type of chart, but it's not dynamic. It's not the data. And then here at the x-axis, again, I've removed the data and just have a placeholder empty array. So later I can say option.x-axis.data equals whatever and manipulate it, right? And same thing with the series. I'm just leaving placeholder arrays here. And so that original option object from this chart has been just cleaned up and reduced down to the most basic thing, and give me some points that I can manipulate. So then I did this in a couple different phases. Basically, I stripped out the things I wanted to make dynamic. So what do I want to group everything by? What's the x-axis and y-axis? And the chart type. I think I mentioned at the beginning, the line and the bars chart have very similar data structures. So I made that an option. And then whether or not the lines are stacked, they can all have the same zero reference, or then, they can all be like spaced out and on top of one another. So those were just some options in the option object that I wanted to make, user options that they could change it. And so I moved those to a config object here at the top. And I pass in the data. So I've got this function to build the final chart option, pass in the data and the config object. And then instead of having to add a third and a fourth and whatever parameter, it's always just going to be another point inside the config. If you want to add more properties, you can. First step inside the function here is to destructure those parameters that I'm passing in, or the single parameter of the config here becomes all these different variables. So instead of me having to reference line chart.config.series name, or the radio group here, rad.group_by.selected option value, I don't have to keep typing all that. I'm just passing it in as an object and then unpacking it right here. Okay, and then the X series and all series. Let's look at the X series on the original example. This is a list of the columns. Let's see, across the x-axis here. So in this case, it's the day of the week. but it's going to start out as an empty array. And then as you're looping over the raw data that we've got back from SQL, I want to be able to push values into this. So this is where I'm going to create that just as I'm going through, like let it build up, and then we'll eventually push it into the config object. And then all series, for this one I used an object because I want to reference each one and be able to pull it back out by its property name. So we're going to start out with an empty object and then add a series to it, and it'll be called item type. This is the cereal or the fruit or whatever item type it is. It'll be all series dot whatever, and then it'll have its data. So then series group by. I want to show this one. I want to maybe run or just return this. Where can I do this at? I got to find the bottom of this function. Here's what it's returning. I'm going to comment this out and tell it to just return that series groups. Okay, so it took that empty object and it said that series group dot channel 1, and now here's an array. And I'm using Lodash group by for this so that I can get each property as a dot channel 1. Here's an array, and then that's multiple objects in that array. Here's channel 2, and it has multiple objects, right? So you could do that with some vanilla JavaScript, but Lodash is a lot easier, a lot less lines of code. So let's get rid of that. All right, where was I at here? Series groups. So I'm defining this object that now it's split up by item type, and I can say dot item type, go to that item and get that subset of data, which then needs transformed into that right format for a series. So object.keys of series group, that's going to be the property names, all the item types. And for each one of those, I'm just saying order them by the field the user has selected. So instead of it being hard-coded and the order by happening, in the SQL, you might want to reorder the data, let the user reorder it. And so I'm passing in that value here that the user has selected. And then just defining the series data, empty array, loop over the data and push it. And here this includes, it's just keeping from having duplicates across the names for the x-axis. You only want each value once for the item type or whatever thing you're charting by. And then pushing the actual value every time. So for X, you only have, 5 if you're doing days of the week or 7 or whatever. Whereas for the data itself, you want all of it. So you see how if it's not included, then go ahead and push it. So we only get one per category. It'll do once for this item type, and then now this is going to be false, and it's going to skip it until it gets to the next series. And then the first one will grab that header again, and then it pushes all the rows. Count series. So here's a object that's close to what a final series would look like, and it's putting that series data in it. And then here it's checking to see if the user wanted it stacked or not, changing one last little thing there. Finally, I build up the output, like what would the finished series be now that I've looped through everything. And then I'm just returning the option object. Here I'm using the spread operator to take this version. This is my starting version of the option object. I'm putting it inside of a new object and using the spread operator to unpack it basically, and then overwrite those couple of points. Now that I know what the x-axis are and the legend and the labels or whatever, just repacking that option object and overriding those couple of points and returning it. And now with all of these config things up here, you have an easy place to reference a few different inputs from the user, and those get passed to the UI here and let them choose which columns that they want to chart by and everything. The last piece of this would be to re-trigger the query when these options are changed. So there's an on selection change for radio buttons, and you could use a select widget if you want and have on option change, whichever trigger you want to use, and just rerun the query. And you would, let's see, now we want to go back to maybe this one. Which one has the SQL? So when you're selecting, instead of item type every time, you could select the value that they've chosen from that column, like which field do they want to chart. And so in this one that I made dynamic, so I'm bouncing all over, sorry. In this one that's dynamic, it's only on the front end. You'll notice there's no query in this one, but I've got the JavaScript to make it dynamic. And then here I've just got some hard-coded sample data. And so I'm looping over the same data every time. I'm not running a query, right? The last piece of this would be you make every one of these changes here, rerun the query, and connect it to that input. So right here, instead of item type, you could say input one, or I don't think I have select widget on this example on the UI, so it's not coming up. But whatever your widget name is, you could pass that in here. And the exact same query then, this is the key thing, is you don't need 12 queries for the item types, or one for item type and one for, say they want to chart by the next field, day of the week or whatever. You don't need a separate query for each one. You just have to pass in that value, the field name that they've selected, and make that the thing that you're grouping by, or that you're, the group by, the order by, pretty much everywhere that you reference that field name. It could be a input from the selected column there. So that's way too much to try to actually build it in an hour, but I wanted to kind of explain how everything works and at least give you the pieces to kind of connect all that stuff. I think that's about it, Kevin. Is there any questions or anything else you think I kind of glossed over?
No, I mean, this is awesome. You pretty much took us from zero to review the best preferences or the best way to create database queries, how to handle big data sets, how to manipulate the data for data visualization. So, I mean, this is great, and I'm guessing that you will be putting all of this into the community portal, right?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a post right now too that'll go along with this video. Hoping to have it done, so that we can share it with the video. But what I want to do is give you a guide, a walkthrough in text format for the same process. Like, I'm starting with some chart type, and I've got my data in this totally different format. So trying to break it down into the general steps involved, but it's going to be different for each data type, your data source, if it's an API or SQL, and then the chart type that you're using. So each one's going to be a little different, and I'm trying to approach it from that general steps that could help anybody.
Exactly. And I think that what you did is good, that once you have like a process of manipulating the data that works for you,
Mhm.
probably replicating that to other data formats that's needed to have for different type of charts in this case are probably going to be much easier. And then the first part is obviously the hardest, but once you find a way to manipulate the data and have all of these functions that you share, that's probably going to be much easier for any developer out there. And I know that you're going to be putting not only the articles you mentioned, but also the template that you just built in the community portal, right?
Yeah, yep, that'll be out. Hopefully, by the time we have the video out, but it might end up being next week or so. I'm just about done.
That's cool, no pressure. And yeah, for everyone, also a reminder again to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we're going to be not only putting more videos, but also remember that Joseph is most of the Fridays doing the Friday Tech workshop, where he just shares his screen, showcase how to build Appsmith things. So if this thing that we just did might be too complex for you, I recommend first of all taking a look at all of the different workshops that Joseph has been doing. Some of them are very low level, where you can review the best practices for SQL queries and other
Mhm.
things. He has been working with custom widgets and charts, and then continue to watch other Friday Tech workshops that Joseph is going to be doing. Remember, on Fridays. So definitely subscribe to our channel, because there's videos every week. There's a Friday Tech workshop and live coding events like this one that we just had. Joseph, any closing words? Do you want to say anything about maybe the community programs or anything that you want to share with the community right now before we close up?
Yeah, just wanted to announce that we have officially named our first two Appsmith ambassadors. We have Oscar Santana, who's did the case study with us a few weeks ago on his
Right.
fertility clinic. Everything there runs on Appsmith, and then Baptiste in the French channel. So Oscar's helping out in the Spanish channel on Discord. Both of them have been really. We're just making it official.
Right.
They're always in there helping. Two different channels where the support team like would like to help, and we jump in when we can, and we'll like use Google Translate or whatever. But we've seen two different people in the community already stepping up, already helping out. And so basically, we're just making it official, and we've named them an ambassador for the Discord channels. We're also looking, just keeping an eye out as demand increases. If anybody's interested in a channel for another language, or if you're interested in leading that one, like if you
Yeah.
speak something besides English and you're already using AppSmith and you can help support that. We had the two going already. We went ahead and named the two people that have been helping. And as demand increases and we identify, new people that are interested, then we'll just keep adding them. I think Portuguese is probably going to be next because
Exactly.
we've seen four different people on YouTube I've seen just in the community, random, people making their own videos. They're not, and you're welcome to post it on the portal too if you want, but it's not on our content, right? It's just people making their own tutorials, and then we'll share it on Discord and let people know what other creators are doing. And yeah,
Exactly.
so we're just trying to support the global community and get people that can help in every area, every region.
Yeah, we have seen a lot of people in the Portuguese language using AppSmith, which is great. Actually, when we look our metrics in different platforms, we see that Brazil and Portugal always comes in the top. We know that we have a lot of lovers in those countries in terms of AppSmith usage. So it will be great to have any of those community members taking the lead. So if you speak Portuguese and you want to contribute, let us know on Discord. Reach out to Joseph because it will be nice to have someone contributing in that language, because we know there's a lot of people that uses AppSmith and is looking forward to have content and support and help and just having conversations in that specific language. Awesome. So I think that's a wrap for now. It was amazing, Joseph. Thank you so much for explaining everything you just did. It was a blast for me. Always, when you ask me questions, all of the sudden you put me out of my comfort zone, and that's good. And that's exactly what I want also our audience to experience, like how amazing is to build incredible things with AppSmith in just under 1 hour or around an hour that we just
Mhm.
did. So imagine what you could build in just one day of development. And that's exactly what we have been showcasing. For example, in our live stream last week, we did the live stream with Arpit, our CTO, where we
Mhm.
showcase how we replace the Cypress dashboard with a custom app speed app, and we saved $80,000 per year. And that's
Per
not
year,
only by saving money, because I mean saving money is cool always, but it's also about bringing value, because we explain how we could use AppsMeet AI to not only have the reports of the testing framework, but also analyze the
yeah.
failing tests and say, hey, here's probably where the bug is. Here's how you can fix it. So you give developers an insight on how not only where things are failing, but also how to fix them. So yeah, stay tuned to more content. AppsMeet is not just about building cool stuff; it's about bringing business value to your organization. And until the next one, thank you so much